By Politics and International Relations Professor Siphamandla Zondi. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Zondi. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Hi, good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers.
All right, we've been watching what's been unfolding, Prof, for the past, I'd say, week. This war been brewing, tensions brewing between Ukraine and Russia. And of course, now we're at the point where we're talking about sanctions that are to be imposed by the international community on Russia. What are your thoughts behind all that is taking place and all these recent developments? And do you anticipate that what is coming out of the news now, that indeed Russia will sit down with Ukraine and that some sort of a solution will come through?
Yes, we've been anticipating actual military confrontation, perhaps not to the extent we see right now. We had anticipated, and from how we saw the posture of the of NATO, that there would have been strong reprisal on the side of Ukraine, so that it is a bit of an even war. But what you see a lot more Russia making inroads from the north, from the south, and from the east of Ukraine. And as you indicated, Western countries, not what you said international community. It is Western countries, and about 12 of them out of 196 countries were in the international community that have imposed sanctions on Russia. Perhaps they have the means to do so. Perhaps they have the enthusiasm to do so. It looks like the majority of the international community are looking rather for pressure and persuasion, moral appeal to get the Russians and the Eritreans, and of course the NATO, to sit down and talk through this, because the military confrontational approach will not win and will not help any side.
Yeah.
And all sides need to stand and resolve this issue. Now, the sanctions are good for a show, are good for messaging. But from the first that have been taking place in 2014 and a very little effect, we should expect them to have very little effect right now. The Bank of Russia just released a report almost 2 weeks ago, showing that there is a very small portion of Russian economy that is now conducted in dollar. For over 10 years, from a U.S. linked economic system, even dumping the dollar and looking at alternative currencies, which makes it very difficult then to sanction Russia, because it doesn't really need to depend on the West. Instead, Europe depends on Russia for oil, depends on Russia for gas. It's a quagmire. It's a difficult one.
Yeah. Prof, let's talk about what options that these two countries have at this point. We can see that Ukraine's president is now calling for some kind of an end to this tension and a diplomatic resolution. But the fact that he had openly said that he wants to be part of NATO, and that of course made Putin very angry, it would have to mean that these negotiations are based on the fact that Ukraine would then have to, I suppose, pledge allegiance to Russia. I struggle to see any other way that this will be resolved. Do you think that there would be any other sort of middle ground that Putin or Russia would agree to, other than that Ukraine stops this pleading of being part of NATO and then pledges allegiance to Russia? What do you see as being the solution here?
My sense is that Ukraine knew Russia, how strongly Russia felt about Ukraine inviting NATO, which is an arch enemy of Russia, to be right on the border of Russia. A military alliance that seeks to diminish Russia by inviting it to be at the door, literally, of Russia. Ukraine knew that Russia would be very scared, would be very paranoid, and would to death. It is just disingenuous now of Ukraine to be now talking about negotiating and all of this. I think they thought that NATO would really come to their rescue and fight Russia on their behalf. And yet now they realize that there's no appetite in NATO in the West to fight another war because it could be more costly, more damaging, more difficult invading Afghanistan after it's been weakened or invading Iraq after it's been weakened.
Yeah.
They should have long ago been insisted on a political conversation with Russia, a genuine one, and say, Russia, this is what we want to do. I will know you are worried about this. Find a solution. But their decision to say, because they are a sovereign state, to hell with Russia, was then pushed station, which confrontation they cannot deal with right now. So we are all dealing with the consequences of poor decision making way back in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, when all of these things could have been resolved. But the posture taken was one of confrontation with Russia. Now its confrontation back looks a bit more damaging. Now it looks like Russia is the madman of the house.
Yeah.
When responding as a madman and responding to other madmen who've been seeking an expansion of NATO for a period of time. For Russia, it does feel like it's an existential threat. You must understand that. You can disagree with what they did, but you must understand that they feel that if they allow this, it will be the end of Russia.
Yeah, and you know, according to your analysis, then if you're saying that Ukraine knew all along that Russia wouldn't be happy with you know, them wanting to be part of NATO, what was the end goal then for Russia? What was the plan? You know, if Ukraine knew that this is some sort of a provocation for Russia, what was the end goal? And no doubt that in that eastern region there is, and I will say, a fear of Putin. Why would Ukraine put its head up and say, you know what, we're actually not afraid of Russia, we're not afraid of Putin, and we'll go up against him? What was their plan then all along?
Oh yes, so that has been the attitude, by the way, of the government in Kiev. That to hell with Russia. We're not scared of Russia. They will not touch us. They cannot challenge us. We have the worst on our side. It cannot confront the world. If they try anything, the whole world will come out against them. So they really believed in that statement, and they decided to push Russia right against the wall. Now I'm just thinking for practical reasons. If South Africa had an arch enemy who sought to destroy South Africa at some point, or diminish it or dominate, and if Lesotho decided to invite that enemy to install missiles in Lesotho, to install heavy artillery in Lesotho, to install, we will just fear that at some point we will be attacked through Lesotho.
Yeah.
That, it might be called unreasonable, but it is fear that South Africa to have when you have that, which is why when the Soviet Union had missiles in Cuba, the United States became paranoia, because it thought if this arch enemy has a base just next to us in Cuba, we are in for destruction. It happened. It was fear, real, visible fear. It's the same fear Russia feels right now, to have an arch enemy shown against you right at your border, at invitation of your neighbor with whom you have a long history of coexistence, who has a huge population of Russians in it. It would generate the fear that you see. This is not to justify military incursions and all that, but it's to explain that the military incursions are preceded by other military moves. Both moves are wrong.
All right. Prof. Siphamandla Zondi, we appreciate your time here on SABC News, sir. Thanks for being with us. All right, that's Professor Siphamandla Zondi, International Relations Analyst. Let's take a short break. More news coming up after this. Do stay with us.